This is the session. We're going to introduce deepfakes as a topic, show how they're made, show some recent examples, discuss their promise and peril, and a topic that I am pushing for, which is the AI of archive intelligence. And how, as archivists, we're going to have a seat at the table and we're going to figure out some next steps doing it together. If you have Googled deepfakes in the news at all recently, you see quite a bit of over-anxious language, a future where no one believes anything, the info-apocalypse, an arms race with people. It's a virally spreading and changing code. This is from Samantha over at Motherboard. Apologies for that little F-bomb. Nothing is real anymore. So, today's session is to give you an update that we're at the end of a 9-mile skid on a 10-mile ride. The deepfakes topic is also being referred to as the next fake news, and it is also really a clickbait thing. It gets very anxious. John, what about your session title? Huh? Okay. So people ask me, John, you don't mean everything. I mean everything. The very existence of deepfakes as a topic undermines the credibility of all moving images, and that's something that collectively we have to work on. The good news is we have Yvonne here with us today, who has been one of the earliest voices on the deepfakes issue, and has injected some sanity into the discussion. And there's an excellent Gizmodo article, which Bob links to, where she discusses this at length. And I think the slide speaks for itself. That said, I'm going to introduce Gaurav Oberoi. Settle in. It's going to be about 25 to 30 minutes of a really fun ride on deepfakes. You're really going to enjoy it. So, thank you.
Thank you all for having me. This is my first time at an Archivist conference. I come from the tech industry, so I'm sure we'll get along on how nerdy we all are. But we have a lot to cover, so I'm going to get right into it. John, thank you for introducing deepfakes. I'm going to start at the very beginning with a story. So about a year ago, on December 11th, more commonly known as International Mountain Day, I was celebrating in the traditional style, wearing a Bavarian garb and performing traditional dances with my family. It's my wife, my mom, dad, and brother. And earlier that day we were talking about how auto-generated video face swapping is really fake and bad. And I remember after this dance taking a break for a refreshing glass of mountain goat milk and looking at my phone when I suddenly saw this. This hit that day. Somebody on Reddit had used the latest in AI-generated techniques to take images of actresses and put them onto pornographic videos. He also released the source code. Now, at this point, a lot of people started to get alarmed and say, wow, what's going to happen here? As well as people from the technical community were like, does this actually even work that well? But this was sort of relegated to people who had some expertise using this. But about a month later, somebody, of course, released an app. So now anybody could do it. And that's really when everybody flipped out. So, this is when fake news was at its peak. We're heading towards the midterms. And so there's a lot of panic. And just to give you an idea, that little blip at the start of December was the first time anybody had heard of deepfakes. By the time February hit, it reached sort of mass paranoia. This is a Google Trends slide. And if you've used that, you know that it's really hard to tell without comparison. So I searched and searched for something that was just as popular as deepfake, and I found how to poach an egg. So about as many people look for that as look for deepfakes. I learned a lot about how to make poached eggs. It's pretty hard. But it doesn't really even compare to another looming societal problem, Kanye West, which is about 20 to 100 times more popular than deepfake. So a lot of people don't know about this. But I think the reason I'm here to talk to you is because it is real, it's not just fantasy, It will affect your day job, much like fake news is beginning to affect your day job. It's something you'll have to account for. And really, what I'm hoping is in this talk, you'll get an idea of this is real, how it works, some coping tools, and I'll also try to keep you entertained through the process. So why am I giving this talk? I am not an AI expert, but I have worked in the tech industry for a very long time. I've started and sold a couple of companies and built some communities. About a year ago, I got the lucky chance to go and work at this magical place called the Allen Institute for Artificial Intelligence. It's funded by Paul Allen. About 100 people work there. They do pure research on AI. I joined them to commercialize some of these and perhaps turn it into a startup. And just to give you an idea of what that actually means, right now I'm working on a project where we're trying to extract information from contracts. I also worked on a project where we were looking at ultrasound images to find certain anatomical parts, and this can become a game-changing product in a couple of years. I also looked at commercial applications for finding stuff in satellite images. So if you could count every car in every retail store in Portland every day, you could create insights that tell you how often people are shopping or what's going up and down. Businesses want to buy that information. And I looked at generated media or deepfakes. Now I know what you're thinking. Why? Why would you do that? This sounds like a terrible thing. Well, of course, you all working with moving images are no strangers to the large computer graphics industry. But just to illustrate again, computer graphics have been used across retail and other places for a long time. This comes from a Wired article in 2014, where IKEA pointed out that 75% of their catalog is computer graphics. They're rendered images. They're not photographs. That allows them to build these a lot faster. This is from a similar article in 2016. Most car commercials today are shot without the car. They're shot with this rig. CG adds this on afterwards, which is great for car manufacturers because they can, without shooting, again, show different models in different markets. Or now that, they probably know what your favorite color is, show you the exact color you like when you're watching a YouTube video. So right around that time, this tweet came out from a Goodfellow called Goodfellow. He is a young man who invented this concept, generative adversarial networks. And he pointed out that there's a company that was just taking photographs of clothing and turning it into fully generated images. So all of these images are generated except this one and that one. So you can imagine that this kind of technology does have commercial use cases, can really lower the time and cost of building these products. So yeah, back to why am I giving this talk. So as I was looking at this, to experiment with this technology, I ended up creating swaps of two famous late-night TV hosts, Fallon and Oliver. And as you can see, the results are quite striking. I know nothing about video manipulation. This was using these algorithms only. And the additional code that I wrote around the code that already was there, I shared it back with the community. And I also wrote a post that sort of described what this is and goes into detail and talks about the pros and cons and so on. And I kind of left it at that, went on to looking for another commercial idea. But over time, it went viral. And today it's on the front page of Google for a variety of deepfakes related searches. And I started getting a lot of calls from journalists, and most of them kind of went like this. Because of course it's very clickbaity and scary, and it is scary, but we also need some calm. I was also lucky enough to be invited to provide some comment in a Netflix documentary that BuzzFeed was doing. My favorite part of this is my title, Face Swapping Enthusiast. Put that on my LinkedIn profile. But I also got to come here and speak with all of you, and so thank you for that. I really appreciate it. But it just so happened 2 days before I came, the producer of that BuzzFeed show sent me an email saying, John Oliver and Jimmy Fallon finally saw your work. They didn't credit it, but your bits are famous. So this is from 2 nights ago.
But wait, I actually have a video as well, and I wanted to show you if you haven't seen. Look at the video. It's real deal.
Nobody wants that. Sure, that's very impressive technology that could be used for a great number of good things. I think deep down we all know it's going to get used for porn.
And on they go. But in summary, I'm giving this talk. I'm not an expert by any means on cutting-edge AI, but I've worked with this technology and look at its practical uses. So I hope I can tell you a little more about it. I'll start by going into what exactly are deepfakes. You've seen a few examples, but let's talk about them. So we've had face swapping tools for a long time. And you could have done this using Photoshop. There's actually a feature now in Snapchat where you can swap faces. And there are literally dozens of apps on the App Store. There are so many apps that some kind blogger enumerated the best ones. Thank you, TechWiser. That will make my holiday shopping list a little better. And of course, you saw my goofy video of my family earlier. This is from a site called JibJab, where you can make holiday greeting cards. Highly recommend it. They're a big hit. But this video is clearly fake. What I'm talking about is cutting-edge, Hollywood-grade CGI. So this is from Rogue One, a 2016 movie where they brought back Carrie Fisher, as well as Peter Cushing over here, and recreated them in amazing detail. But it required a lot of technology and special effects work. By the way, one thing to point out, at least in this case, neither the original actor whose face they were portraying, Peter Cushing, nor the digital human were given any credit in the credits of the movie. So it's kind of interesting on why they didn't do that. I'm sure there was some remuneration paid to their trust or whoever owns their IP, but this is an interesting area to sort of figure out. I also want to point out this technology isn't new. This is a scene from Forrest Gump. I found a grainy image here, but if you watch the movie, it's full color, high def, and they've got this scene with Kennedy, and there's actually a part where he talks, and they found an actor to replicate his voice really well. So this isn't new technology. So what are we really freaking out about? What has changed? Well, what's changed is, of course, AI, and what that really means is that you don't need any skill now. Like any troll or bad actor or idiot can get access to this and start pumping these out, and they can do it at scale. So what that means is, if I wanted to, as a Russian troll, show that there was a protest with violent clashes, I might create lots of videos of that protest and spread them around. Or if I wanted a certain segment of the population to see exactly the kind of message I want, I could create that and hyper-target. It would have taken hours and days to do this with rooms and rooms full of people, but now they can throw it in an algorithm. So of course, when the world gets a hold of this, what do they actually do? Apart from creating porn, they create Nicolas Cage movies. So I have no idea why, but people have started reviving Nicolas Cage's career. And he is really all over the place. This is a great YouTube channel. It's called Deepfakes. It's totally safe for work. And the person there has been creating all sorts of really great videos. You can go check that out. It's super great. But basically, to summarize, deepfakes refers to the ability to generate hyper-realistic video using these AI techniques and really not needing any skill. So what do I mean by not needing any skill? Let's talk about how they work. I'll start with the practical, and I'll go into the theoretical. So on the practical side, if you wanted to do a video face swap before deepfakes, you would need to know how to use a tool like Adobe After Effects. So this is a video I found on YouTube. It's a 15-minute tutorial where the guy painstakingly shows you how to do this. He clearly spent many more hours offline, took a long time to get it right. So in the 15 minutes you might just learn how to do this. I'm actually going to show you how to do this with deepfakes in about 30 seconds. Okay, this is what you do. You go and download the app or the code. I'll let you figure out how to do that. You then go get a bunch of images or video of each of the parties. The more diversity you have in videos, the better, because it's going to say, I have a picture of Fallon looking straight ahead, and I have a picture of Oliver looking straight ahead. And it will learn to map those. And so the more angles, lighting, poses you have, the better it's able to do the mapping. And these algorithms aren't just remembering what they saw previously, they are filling in the gaps. But again, the more points you give them, the fewer gaps they have to fill in between. But yeah, you do that, you click a button, you wait, and that's it. It really is, and I'm not exaggerating. The truth is that the results you'll probably get out of the box will be a little blurry, and almost entirely the reason is you don't have enough data. So I discovered as I was working with this And a lot of AI technology, as you've probably heard, data is the new oil. It's all about training these algorithms by showing them lots and lots and lots of examples. The more you have, the better they learn. But what that means is you sort of load them up, you hit a button and you leave. You don't have to hire armies of people. And of course, you can use dozens or hundreds of computers to speed all that up. So that's the practical side. I'd love to talk a little bit about how this works. I apologize if this is a bit geeky, and I certainly won't be able to do any real justice to this, but it might give you an idea of what's going on under the hood. At least I hope it will. So I'll start by just pointing out, images are really grids of numbers. So we're used to seeing them as RGB colors, or there's a grayscale image over there. So once you recognize that they're grids of numbers, if you say, hey, I want to generate an image, you could just generate a random grid of numbers. And if you did that, you would generate an image that looks like this. It would be noisy and messy, but now we want to actually train an algorithm to do it. Well, let me also talk about manipulating images. If you have an image like that green thing on that side, which is your left, far on the left, and I have some filter or some kind of numbers I want to multiply it with, I could apply that filter to every part of the image, multiply those together, sum them together, and then I would get this smaller image that's being generated over here. Okay, there's other stuff I could do. I could take an image and shrink it down or grow it up. So all the way on the side there is an image that I've broken into 4 grids. The red grid, I just pick the largest number and I say, that's the number I'm going to use. That's just one strategy for taking a big image and shrinking it down. You could take the average of those numbers, and then upsampling, you do something similar. So I'm just introducing some basic concepts, but the point is, using these techniques, you could string a whole bunch of them together and end up with this very large neural network architecture. And then the question is, well, what should the numbers be that you're multiplying by? That yellow box, the filter, how is it going to figure out what's the right way to multiply the pixels of Jimmy Fallon's face to turn them into the pixels of John Oliver's face? And that's where we sort of introduce this concept of an encoder-decoder. So very broadly, conceptually, what we're doing is we're saying, take this image of Fallon, run it through this, and you'll end up with a smaller image, a smaller grid. That's our encoding. It represents something about that picture. Then train a different network, a decoder, to take it and expand it back out into pixels. Okay, so you sort of say, that's what I'm trying to do. Now, the first time you do it, you're going to get a mess. You're going to get some noise like that. And what you're going to tell the algorithm is, hey, that wasn't quite right. What I want is something else. So pixel by pixel, you'll calculate the difference. You'll feed that back to the algorithm. And over time, the algorithm will adjust all those weights until it starts producing something that looks correct. And that's what people usually mean when they say, we're training a neural network. They're trying to get it to learn those parameters, those weights, to be just right. And there are millions and millions of these. So when it comes to deepfakes, we actually use this concept and do something tricky. We do what I just described for Fallon, and we do what I just described for Oliver. The difference is that the encoding part is shared, whereas there's a different decoder, there's a different network that has learned how to take this representation and blow it up into Fallon's face, and take this representation and blow it up into Oliver's face. But both of them use the same network to compress it down. And then finally, you swap them out. So you encode that face into a representation, and then it blows back out into John Oliver. I'm sure that has left lots of gaps and was not a complete explanation, but I will point to my blog, and you can learn more about it there. I described an autoencoder. The most popular way that these are being done today is called a generative adversarial network. I'm not going to talk about them in any detail, but I will say that this is a very hot area of research. And somebody published a chart of cumulative papers in the field last year, and you can see that there's a lot of excitement. I'm also referencing Ian Goodfellow again. He's now at Google Brain, and there's a legendary story about how Gans came out, where he was at a bar in Montreal drinking beer and arguing with his friends, and then went home and stayed up all night and produced it. And it's largely been called a big improvement, or a big seminal work in the field. So, what can deepfakes do today? So I've talked about a few examples, but I'm going to start going through a few more. And really, I'm talking here more broadly about synthetic images and videos generated with the help of AI. So in this case, we have lip syncing. The Putin's head follows the original video, but his lips are now whatever that person is doing. Here's an example where now the entire head is being generated. So the left is the image is from a webcam. The thing on the right is completely generated by the algorithm. And I think this was done in real time. Of course, that woman is his colleague, so to train this algorithm, she stood there and made all sorts of faces for many, many hours, and that created lots of variations on her face so the algorithm could learn. But then they were sort of puppeting her. And of course, BuzzFeed put these together.
Like Jordan Peele. This is a dangerous time.
That's a generated video.
Moving forward, we need to be more vigilant with what we trust from the internet.
So you get an idea
It's a time when we need to rely
of what happens when you start putting all these things together. But you can also generate entire dances. So the images on the right currently are generated based on the dance that's happening there. And these two grad students, again, they took about 20 hours of video to train. So you're going to see them training in a second. There, see, they're just taking up the video. And now, this is generated. And you can see there's flaws, but again, more data, more training time, larger networks, and there's clearly research being done on this. NVIDIA released this, where they trained, again, to generate faces of celebrities. They trained it on lots of existing celebrities, so you might recognize some, but as it morphs between ones that we haven't. But why stick to faces? This was somebody who created an emoji generator. So they first got 1,000 pictures of people. They drew 1,000 emojis, and then they fed it to the network. And now you can pass it a face it's never seen before, and based on the faces it's learned from in the past, it'll be able to generate a new emoji for you. Emoji makers beware. Here's another example of this work. So this is a network that can make you look older, or change your gender, or change your emotion, which is my favorite part here. So you can give it a picture of someone and say, I want a happy or an angry face. And it's learned how to do this, again, from seeing lots and lots of these examples. Of course, people are using this not just on faces. There's ways to take your painting and make it look like a Van Gogh or a Monet, or to even take a picture of a summertime scene and turn it into wintertime. So there are lots of really interesting applications of this, all the way to audio. So if you guys remember Google Duplex, this was in the news maybe 3 or 4 months ago. They had a very realistic sounding voice call up and start making hair appointments. This used natural language processing so it could understand, as well as synthetic voice generation, as well as voice understanding, to cobble this all together and create this really dystopian thing. People are also using it to generate music. There's lots of good stuff going on. So, deepfakes are going to be, like any new technology, it's double-sided, and I think this one has some pretty scary implications. John had sent me lots of material for this talk, so thank you for that. And one of the things he pointed out was, if you just go on Twitter and search for deepfakes, you'll find people who are selling pornographic videos, and there's prices. I didn't have space to fit it here, but whoever this vendor is, also has a referral program and a bonus program. So we're doing some channel marketing. This is really scary stuff. This poor woman out of Australia, some internet trolls found her Instagram page, started grafting her face onto videos. It was traumatizing for her, her family, her community. She didn't back down. She took it all the way to the TED stage and all the way to Australian Parliament and got legislation passed. I think we're going to see this kind of legislation eventually come our way here too. I think that's a good thing. I've talked at length about political instability. My co-speaker will talk more about that. I think this is one of the scary things. What happens in a post-deepfakes world where people start denying that these videos ever happened or they weren't me. And then, of course, Witness does a lot of great work in this space, but I think of the common person who's dealing with corruption or genocide or other problems. How are we going to know what's really happening in Syria if the Syrian forces start to use deepfakes to spread peaceful pictures of happy villagers? Who knows? So those are the scary parts. What about the good parts? Well, I think the first is we know it's going to affect Hollywood. And I bring this back because the Deepfakes guy regenerated the scene, and he compares the Hollywood version, his version, and the original Star Wars. And you'll notice that it almost looks better. And this was one guy with his GPU, not a team of experts who are highly paid. Maybe we'll see favorite actors come back. There's I think you'll see this later, but there's an Audrey Hepburn commercial that's out there. And so there's certainly questions about ownership, copyright, how are we going to address those things. Video games have been getting more and more real. This was a researcher who used the FIFA video game and then used Lionel Messi's images, and the one on the right is the one which he did, which already looks better than the original video game. And you can imagine in a couple of years with a beefier chip in your Xbox, video games will look indistinguishable from reality. All of this deepfake stuff is about generating pixels where they didn't exist. Another use case for that is taking blurry images and filling them out. Why would you want to do that? Well, there are certainly archival reasons, I'm sure, but another is, FaceTime. If I'm FaceTiming you and there's no bandwidth, I could just send you a crappy, blurry image, and then the chip on your phone could fill in the rest, and you could still look like you're having a great call with me. Adobe has started to show uses of this. This is an example where they trained a network by just removing random boxes and then asking the network to fill it out. You can see it's not perfect. The sailboat in the top row has holes in it, and it's not perfect, but Adobe has actually demonstrated in some of their videos. There's like a picture of a video of someone at the Taj Mahal. There's a ugly looking power line in the way, and they just sort of blot it out and it disappears from the video and draws whatever's behind there. So these are some of the applications that are on the positive side. I love this one. Wouldn't it be great to be able to take Feynman's legendary physics lectures and watch that on YouTube? It's too late to capture enough video of him, but it's not too late for the other guys. And I think that would be really cool if we could do that. This is not AI, but I think it shows where this could go. At USC, they took lots of recordings of a Holocaust survivor, chopped them up, and then created a system where you can talk and ask questions, and it'll play the appropriate clip. And it really feels like you're having a conversation, engages you in history in a way that you haven't before. But you could imagine we could recreate these and even recreate memories of loved ones, especially with all the video and photos that we take today. There are some applications there. And not quite video generation, but I just did want to throw this out. This 3D avatar was generated with one selfie taken on a camera phone. And so there are certainly applications for VR. And as these models get more realistic and rich, they'll end up in video. About 3 months ago, Christie's had the first ever auction for an AI-generated piece of art. They thought it would, they set it at I think 10 grand, and it sold for almost $500,000. This was generated by one of the gangs that I'm talking about. You can go read all about it. So what should we do about this? I'm just going to touch on this because there's much more content from my colleagues about this. But at a very high level, education, I think, is the first step, and that's why I'm here. I think the more people are aware, the more they'll be looking for these and be asking questions. The other is, I do think we need some regulation around this. Now, regulating research has always been really hard. And there's examples for this. Like today, as a researcher, if you were trying to detect, trying to fight viruses or malware, you're allowed to create them in your lab. You're just not allowed to package them and sell them and let them out into the wild. And I'm sure we'll see some similar approaches come to this kind of technology. It's really when the application, I guess another example is drones. Autonomous drones with targeting capability could be used to generate autonomous weapons and warfare. But they could also be used for precision agriculture, and they are, and that will make a huge impact. So where do you draw the line is a tricky thing. But we do need to regulate this. Detection is another side. DARPA is spending a ton of money. This is Dr. Hani Farid, who's probably the foremost expert in the field of detecting these fakes. John was corresponding with him last week, and he'll talk a little more about some of Farid's comments, but very interesting. The gist of it is, it's hard. Just like malware or viruses, it's a constant cat and mouse game, and you're going to go back and forth. The technologies, it's going to be hard to stop. And then distribution. The fact that our social networks are designed to send the most nonsensical content and have it go up there means that conspiracy theories can propagate. The fact that people they're Sandy Hook deniers is just terrible. But you didn't need deepfakes for that to happen. You just needed some distribution channel and sufficiently motivated people. So we do have to address that too. And of course, in 2018, no conference, no talk about technology would be complete without a mention of blockchain. But certainly, if you could, have a cryptographic chip on your phone that signs the image that you've made and then puts it into a safe place, like some blockchain thing where others can verify it really did come from your phone, then you may have a way to actually track authenticity, and it may mean that, that becomes a really important way of verifying what you've done. That's all I have. Thank you all for letting me talk to you.
Thank you very much, Gaurav. That was awesome. So I keep going back to Yvonne's statement in the Gizmodo article. This really is a phenomenon that is the archives have always had to deal with forgeries or fakes or plagiarism. We think of all of motion pictures. Among this grouping, we have studios and archives holding material that is not real, special effects, staged, recreated, virtual, fake, whether on purpose and explicitly or made with the intent to deceive. The not real footage within this universe is roughly grouped into two groups of CGI and hybrid reality or deepfakes, the topic of today's talk. CGI, where you live in a special effects saturated marketplace. I don't need to do too much talking about what is capable these days. In the past, Woody Allen and Zelig, Gaurav mentioned Forrest Gump, where it took teams of special effects experts hours of work to create what can essentially be done with the click of a mouse today. And so within the deepfake subsection of not real, we are going to be developing a nomenclature. These are the four types generally that deepfakes may contain, which is face swaps, audio deepfakes, making people saying things they never said, deepfake puppetry, like the dance material that we saw with Gaurav, deepfake lip syncing, like we saw with President. This is a very rough trend of studio CGI versus AI-enabled hybrid reality content. Hani Farid, who I've been talking with since early this spring. We have some clients in common doing vastly different work. But you see the error bar at the end of 2020. He thinks 2020 might be the year we see material that is indistinguishable from CGI-created content. The space in between the two lines is ours. This is where we're going to be exercising archive intelligence. I have a track record as somewhat of a futurist. A lifetime ago, it seems, I brought the stock footage economy online with partners from CNN, National Geographic, NBC, Paramount Pictures, and others. I spotted this trend also going on with drones, discussed this quite a bit with Lee. There's a disruption and an opportunity. Not too long ago, you had to have a Bell Jet Ranger helicopter with a gyroscopically stabilized Tyler mount shooting Betacam HD. Thousands of dollars to get what you can get with a $600 drone shooting 2K. Getty saw this as an opportunity and developed not only drone content, but producers of drone content. Other opportunities down the road, perhaps you saw Blade Runner, a Frank Sinatra jukebox singing, your favorite tunes in a reanimated way. Have Elvis come and sing at your home or event. The Dove Chocolate Bar Company negotiated with the estate of Audrey Hepburn to recreate her likeness in a Dove Chocolate Bar ad. And so, I'm sure it was complicated. It is a little bit of a breakthrough that this was able to be done with reanimating a deceased actor. AI, I should really want to quickly, and it's a session on its own, but it is being used in post-production and restoration, ADR and looping, restoration, quite a bit of work doing frame rate conversion, restoration, stabilization, motion reanimation. A very good example of that is Peter Jackson's When We Were Young. Interestingly, and as a working colorist, the color work, colorization is still done essentially by hand. But all the other work was done with code. And this is an excellent example if you get a chance to see it. Are deepfakes illegal? Again, a session unto itself. Certainly protected as parody, free speech, and fair use. There are protections for deepfake victims. They are mostly on the civil side and therefore exist only as much as the injured person is willing to pursue any kind of claims. There are rights of publicity is also a complicated area because it varies state to state. Screen Actors Guild has come out pretty strongly on this issue, have spoken out how they want to protect their members, both living and dead. They see the right to publicity as an asset, much like copyright, and that there should be protections in place where a person's likeness is reappropriated. One problem, they ran into these people who feel that this really was an overreaching statement and curtails their ability to create new content, and furthermore might be unconstitutional. This back and forth was really about a bill within the New York State legislature. He's responding to some specific language, but in general, safe to say the studios are really not in favor of this. Rights and legal issues, as you'll see with Yvonne, are largely moot when one discusses the actions of bad actors. And we will all need to, again, practice artificial archive intelligence for footage that comes in and goes out from your archive. But we already have solid footing. We've been moving images in that's better than anybody else. And actually a long experience in dealing with what is real and fake. With that, I'm going to hand it back over to Yvonne. She gets her own Drudge Report siren because it needs to be up as high in the discussion as some of the other language.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to say thank you, John, for including me sort of a last-minute addition to this very, very interesting panel. This is not really my area of expertise today. I'm mostly going to be presenting work that's being done by my colleague, Sam Gregory. So for me, this has been an amazing learning experience, so thank you. So I'm going to be talking about deepfakes and its impact on human rights and archives. And as I said, a lot of this is coming from work done by my colleague. So I'm just going to talk, my talk is not going to be very long. I'm talking about some of the threats that we're seeing to human rights, potential approaches, and then specifically potential approaches that archives and archivists can be involved in. I think a lot of you are familiar with Witness, but for those of you who aren't, Witness is an international nonprofit organization that works to make it possible for anyone, anywhere, but especially human rights defenders and activists to use video and technology to protect and defend human rights. So our current work on deepfakes comes out of our over 25 years working with human rights video content. And of course, in the last 10 years, the world has seen an explosion of audiovisual human rights content that's being filmed on our mobile devices, shared on online platforms, and used as evidence to expose injustice and impunity. Unfortunately, as we've seen, the manipulation of this kind of visual evidence in ways that are not really easy for us to discern with our eyes and ears is also a growing reality. Witness's deepfakes work is part of our broader efforts to protect and uphold marginalized voices and human rights against the pressures of disinformation, media manipulation, and authoritarianism. So we're really focused on having pragmatic conversations, coming up with workable solutions, and building on existing communities of expertise, such as everyone in this room. So for example, earlier this year, we hosted an experts summit on this very issue to start thinking through the problem and solutions, some of which is summarized in this presentation, and the link to the report, the full report of the summit is going to be listed at the end of my slide deck. So I don't think we need to really go over this too much, but just to say, when I say deepfake, in this presentation, I'm really referring to all kinds of synthetic media, which we've covered in John and Gaurav's presentation. So beyond sort of the face swapping, hybrid faces that we traditionally call deepfakes, I'm also talking about other techniques that may have more subtle effects, including simulated audio, deleting foreground or background elements, using Photoshop or Adobe Cloak, and then the facial reenactment and facial reconstructions, of which we've seen many examples so far. Okay, so deepfake threats. So as we've seen, as tools and methods to create deepfakes have become more accessible, so low in cost, easy to use, and sort of usable with your sort of personal computing power. We've also seen bad actors who have become more sophisticated in their use of social media to manipulate the public. So, of course, concerns about manipulation of audiovisual content and our inability to tell what's a real document from what's not a real document has increased. So what are the potential threats presented by deepfakes and synthetic media from a human rights perspective? I just want to break down a couple of categories of possible disruption. So reality edits, which involve changing information with evidentiary value that's found in a video, such as the signs or the insignia that somebody in the military might be wearing, landmarks that indicate location. These kinds of edits prevent us from knowing where and when an incident has occurred, and very importantly, who might be responsible for that incident. And it also enhances the ability of perpetrators to challenge the truth. Credible doppelgangers, or the reenactments or reconstructions of real recognizable people, that could be used to manipulate people into committing rights abuses or to incite them to violence or conflict is another category. For example, I'm sure you recognize Aung San Suu Kyi. There are many recorded speeches of her. So we were talking about the training data earlier that could potentially be used to generate deepfakes. And while she hasn't actually said anything to directly incite violence in Burma to date, it is well known that she has indirectly sort of excused it or allowed it to happen. So a deepfake of her saying something inflammatory wouldn't be unbelievable, especially given a context where people are ready to believe any sort of anti-Muslim, anti-Rohingya sentiment. And so would most certainly probably spread like wildfire and then lead to violence. Similarly, news remixing is a kind of deepfake that can make it appear as if certain information was broadcast by a credible news outlet. This form of deepfake exploits the credibility of news media in order to disrupt and change public narratives, and also has the effect of eroding trust in the media. So as we've seen, for example, in India, also individual journalists have been targeted for violence or harassment by having inflammatory statements falsely attributed to them. So this still here is actually from a video from the 1990s that was successfully used in the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia to prosecute a general in the Serbian army. Today, in an era of deepfakes, however, perpetrators who are caught in the act, who are caught implicated in crimes such as we've seen this was shown in this video, might be able to plausibly deny this kind of video evidence by just simply claiming that this was generated, this is a deepfake, it's not real. Okay, so here's a quote from Hannah Arendt. A people that no longer can believe anything cannot make up its own mind. It is deprived not only of its capacity to act, but also of its capacity to think and to judge. And with such people, you can then do what you please. So floods of falsehood contribute to this erosion of our collective capacity to think and to judge, disrupting the public sphere. We become so mistrustful that any information that doesn't come with extensive corroboration or other forms of verification are assumed to be untrustworthy automatically. So therefore, raising the bar that is needed to present any information as believable. And so this might mean that the people with the fewest resources to meet that bar are less likely to be believed when they try to expose abuses. Okay, so of course the potential outcomes of this information and media manipulation are scary. In already vulnerable societies where trust is already low, where institutions are already weak, we may see even greater loss of trust in those institutions and then rising authoritarianism as the deepfakes spread. Misinformation that is directed at an audience that wants to believe it can spread like a digital wildfire, leading to mob violence, as we've seen with hate speech on Facebook and on WhatsApp in places like India, Sri Lanka, Burma. Deepfakes can be used to demonize and target individuals like human rights defenders, journalists, public figures, and damage the credibility of social movements, such as we've seen in the US with the Parkland student Emma Gonzalez and the fake images that have spread about her. Then, as platforms try to respond to this deluge of deepfakes, we may see them rely even more on AI for content moderation or content censorship and or amplification, which might not be effective and can backfire, as we have already seen with Facebook's failure to adequately moderate hate speech against Rohingya in Burma. And then finally, in the end, ultimately, we may reach a point where zero trust just becomes baseline how we see the world. So, despite this, at Witness, we think that despite how scary this is, we're also at a very pivotal moment, sort of a window of opportunity before the eye of the storm in which we can act proactively. So we don't need to panic, but to prepare. So that's the message from my colleague Sam. This article from the World Economic Forum blog was just published a couple days ago. So broader malicious uses of deepfakes to disrupt political debate, undermine national security, to confuse human rights investigations and attack businesses and civil society groups are not yet completely widespread. And as Gaurav pointed out, it's also important to keep in mind that as methods to create deepfakes become more sophisticated, so do the methods of detecting them. So, and as you mentioned, it's not really clear who's going to win out in the end, but we do know that detection is currently easier than forgery, and that there are detection models for all current forgery AI. And I don't know if is this not true? Okay.
It's hard to validate.
Yeah, and another thing to point out though is that there might be a lag time between the creation techniques and the detection methods that bad actors can exploit that sort of gap. So possible approaches. So what we're thinking through now are ways that we can take action within this window of opportunity. And some approaches that came out of our recent experts meeting include, and these are some things that have already been mentioned by John and Gaurav, building media literacy about deepfake technologies, the threats of maluse, and discernment of deepfakes so that people can be more resilient to disinformation, learning from existing practices, and collaborating on solutions, so between stakeholders like human rights investigators, journalists, archivists, which I'll talk a bit more next, digital forensics experts, cybersecurity experts. Yeah, so we'll come back to that. Developing pragmatic responses that can be taken by different actors at different scales from basic to complex. So, you know, we talk about tech companies and sort of these big actors, but also steps that independent activists, journalists, and researchers can take when they need to sort of do something to protect themselves. I think it's important to come at this issue from a variety of different frameworks, in which, John, you mentioned as well. So through legal means, like some of the IP and copyright points that you raised, through markets, so like a lot of these commercial sort of approaches that you pointed out, in norms, so going back to the media literacy point, and in technology, so like these kind of tools to detect and databases to detect deepfakes. Okay, so since we are at EMEA, I specifically wanted to bring up the role that archivists and archives might play in these approaches. And I don't really have the answers, so I'm just kind of putting these out. Maybe these can just be points to discuss during the Q&A. So in terms of media literacy, how can archivists promote public literacy around deepfakes and general methods of assessing authenticity and trustworthiness? And one thing to note is there is also a significant need for this kind of media literacy outside of the US. In terms of learning from existing practices and collaboration, how can archivists contribute their deep knowledge around issues of authenticity, provenance, and description to this conversation? Pragmatic responses, how can archivists respond to specific misinformation threats or specific key events in direct and practical ways? And then in terms of frameworks for action, how can archivists influence those laws, norms, technologies, and market and commercial forces to address deepfakes? So a final note is that whatever approaches are taken, it's important to keep in mind who needs these tools the most, those in the most vulnerable situations, and who may be put in harm's way by any solutions that we take. So we want to take a rights-based approach that maximizes the accessibility of these approaches for as many people as possible. Approaches that minimize suppression of free speech while protecting rights to privacy and freedom from surveillance. That minimizes risk to the most vulnerable societies, creators, and custody holders. And that potentially integrates approaches into platforms so they're available by default to all users. And here's just some of resources that Witness has published on this topic, mostly by my colleague Sam, and then also at the bottom here, that Gizmodo article that I was interviewed on, as well as a number of other archive folks on this topic and how it relates to archivists.
And I'll make sure that these links are available to you as well.
That's it for me.
Okay, thank you very much. What can be done? I really like Dennis's comments earlier this week. MIA members are members of the rebellion who sat at the table and didn't leave. There are technology solutions. I think we covered that pretty well as to sort of the solution areas, including our Defense Department working on the metaphor detection, classified $68 million detection and deepfake creation and deployment. A few of the many questions ahead: copyright, disclosure to your customers, policies, the rights of studios and their actors, authentication. This is an important one. Develop and conform a nomenclature for discussion and cataloging within the archive and without. There is actually some metadata work going on that in the W core front. A recent New Yorker article highlights Honey Fareed. He feels that we're gonna never be as good as the deepfake creators, truly, but that it is not a crippling event, that we have spawned viruses, malware. We react and respond to those accordingly, and that we can keep them largely at bay. 1 to 2 years before they're going to reach a critical stage, but he remains cautiously optimistic. Thank you very much. Got a few minutes for Q&A. Get the ball rolling. Yes, go ahead.
I'm going to go on a real limb here. Call me crazy, I actually am. I'm going to submit that this is a good thing and that there's a serious silver lining. Because anyone who's taken a Media Literacy 101 class knows that from the moment cameras were invented, they've been distorting reality. In fact, they inherently distort reality. The problem is 95% of our species never got the memo. And maybe it'll take a slap across the face like this for people to suddenly actually operate from a perspective of zero truth until provenance has been established. And I think your point about maybe this is actually a useful thing for distributed ledger technology like blockchain, that's a great idea. I hope you're patenting that. And Yvonne, I think your points about the role of this community in particular in educating the public about things like provenance is humongous, and how could be a working group within EMEA, I think, immediately.
Yes.
I would mention that Kodak, unfortunately, has beaten Gaurav to the blockchain. Longtime supporter of EMEA and there's a recent listserv post by me about Kodak's entry. It was a bit of a head scratcher, but into the authenticity and secure delivery distributed ledgers of motion pictures and primarily still images.
Well, it's hard not to cheer for Kodak being relevant.
Thank you. That was very provocative statements. I liked it a lot. Anybody else?
Hi, this might be addressed in Yvonne's resources links, but I was wondering if there were any tools to detect deepfakes that are already accessible to people like us, like archivists and footage researchers.
There aren't any such tools available. But yeah.
Come up here.
Yeah.
I would say that social media providers are working on this as an add-on to their services, but I'll let Gaurav, our expert, really speak to that.
Yeah, there are no readily available tools out there, but companies like Facebook now internally have big integrity projects. Lots of people are working on them. They're hiring to detect fake videos. It's something they care about. Y Combinator, which is a big investment group in Silicon Valley, very popular, has listed their top 10 things they want someone to build, and one of them is detecting fake videos. So there are calls for arms. The one thing I will say is, the moment you make a great fake video detector and you put it up online where anyone can point it at a video and it says good or bad, that's when all the guys who are making the fake videos will just use it in a loop. Yep. And they'll just use it with their algorithm.
Hani Farid refers them to some asshole Redditor.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's really challenging on how do you produce these and not just arm the bad guys even further. But to answer your question, there's nothing.
By the way, this is a horizontal platter VistaVision projector of Dino's that he had in his carry-on for that session.
Yeah. One more thing, Yvonne's got something to add.
So I think even though there might not be technology tools that are readily available for you as an individual, I mean, you are an archivist. I mean, you have practices and techniques for determining the authenticity and provenance and understanding where something comes from and what something is that you have at your disposal that a lot of other people actually don't. So it's not just about technology, it's about practices and techniques. So
I just want, my background's in history, so I always think that we're going to end up, what happened to Trotsky can happen in rewriting history this way so powerfully. Are there ways that these can be, that our archives can be infiltrated so that our holdings can be manipulated and changed? Because that concerns me that if there's we're the historical record, right? The archives are the historical record. What if our materials are infiltrated and altered?
Boy, that's a pretty heavy... Yeah, we do have to wrap. This will be the last question. If you guys want to hit at it real quickly. And we are all available to discuss this out in the lobby afterwards. Go ahead.
So infiltrated, I guess, I think that's what John was trying to say. Everything in your archive is now fake. It could be that 5 years from now, someone would look at something in your archive and say, that was probably from the deepfake technology we didn't hear about for 18 months that was being used to generate all these videos coming out of the Congo or some other conflict. So that's entirely possible. The other thing that can happen is someone could take archived footage that you put online, they could train an algorithm, they could then generate more of it, and then say, oh, voila, look, we found this in a USB drive while cleaning out this desk. Now who's going to challenge it and how are you going to deal with that? So I think that's where the title of the talk came from, and that's where it is a real danger. It's something that we have to address, but I think process, context, provenance.
In a way, it doesn't even matter if your archive is infiltrated. If the deepfake concept, and please all use different language, synthetic media, hybrid reality. But just the very existence of deepfakes as a concept does undermine the trust we have. It was Ian Goodfellow who gave me my opening line for the session abstract, that it's been a bit of a fluke that we live in an era that you can believe what you see. And with that, thank you all for coming. Thank you, Gaurav, Yvonne, thank you for witness, Institute for your participation. Really very happy. Thanks.
Thank you.